when you register by August 1st at ses.edu.
People disparage President Obama for being almost too erudite and too articulate.
If we fall for...
There's always a sense that to be too articulate is to be distant.
You know, a bunch of okey doke
is to be the egghead.
You know, it sounds funny or
taken seriously by people with IQs over 80.
But let me just speak.
Too erudite and too articulate.
If you've got health insurance, you can keep it. If you like your health care plan, you will keep your plan. If you've got a business, you didn't build that.
I don't know all the facts. The Cambridge police acted stupidly.
Too articulate.
If we fall for...
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy and welcome to this brand new week of broadcasting on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name, congenial, convivial, and amiable as always. The program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. And you are listening to the American Family Radio Network, the most dangerous network in all of America. Glad to have you in the conversation. Now, we're going to get to a lot today. We're going to focus pretty heavily on the Supreme Court nomination. Donald Trump going to make his announcement tonight at 9. We'll talk about some of the ins and outs of that. That'll be our focus here in the first hour, so I hope you're looking forward to that. I'll share my thoughts on it. I've got a column on the topic. And, Jeff, could you check and see if that column
I
is
will.
up? Yeah,
I will.
okay.
One thing I got to say, I'm really thankful that Hillary Clinton's not appointing her second Supreme Court justice.
Can you imagine
today.
what the show would be like today if we were waiting for a Hillary Clinton selection? Oh, my gosh. So, well, anyway, I want to give just a shout-out to Jeff for that audio tease at the beginning. I was laughing so hard I had to get myself back under control before I could start the program today. So good work on that. When Jeff comes up with one of those intros that makes me laugh, we get done, I say, you have been a bad boy, Jeffrey. You have been a bad boy. So anyway, had a little bit of fun with that. And the beauty of it is we'll get to hear that again at the top of the next hour. So set your alarm clocks, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want to miss that.
It's the title of your article, The Defining Moment of
Yes,
Trump's Presidency.
that's
yes,
it.
It's up.
So I got a column that's up on our website about this choice that Donald Trump has to make tonight. So today's the day to read it because it's going to be old news after Donald Trump makes his announcement. So I would encourage you to go to our website, afa.net. It'll be right there in the middle of that page somewhere about the defining moment of the Trump presidency. Go ahead and open that thing up and read it. Share it with your friends. This is the day to read it because this is the day that the decision is made. So it's kind of a time-sensitive column. Not all of them are, but this is one that needs to be read today. Now, in our reading at pray.afa.net, you can read along with us. You can pray along with us. We are in the prophecy of Isaiah, and we're in the middle of a section where the nation of Judah is dealing with a threat from the kingdom of Assyria, from the region of Babylon. And their king is a guy by the name of Sennacherib, got a huge army. And as we open chapter 36 of Isaiah, Sennacherib has come up against, or his army has come up against the city of Jerusalem. He'd taken all of the fortified towns in Judah. The only one that was left unsubdued and unmolested was the capital city of Jerusalem. And his army now had surrounded Jerusalem. In fact, in the annals of Sennacherib, which is an independent, secular historical source, Sennacherib brags about the fact that he had Hezekiah trapped in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. Now, what he doesn't go on to say, does not go on to tell the end of the story, where he got pulled away, just as Isaiah had prophesied. He got pulled away by a rumor, left the siege, and his army was defeated by the angel of the Lord, who killed 185,000 Assyrians in one night. 185,000 Assyrians gone like that. The threat dissipated and gone. That's the size of the army now that came up against Judah, 185,000 strong, by a guy who hadn't lost a war in ages. In fact, when his aides come to talk to the aides, when his military commander, called the Rabshakeh, that's just a term for a high-ranking military leader, when they came to Jerusalem, Hezekiah sent some aides out to talk to this guy, and he just blasted them for pretending to depend upon God. And the point I want to make here, I'm sure I'm talking to people right now in this listening audience, and you're in a situation kind of like Jerusalem was. You are surrounded by problems, and you're surrounded by threats, and you're surrounded by things that look like they're going to go wrong. You are surrounded by problems that seem too big for you to handle. It might be problems in a marriage. It might be problems in a family with children. It might be problems with health. It might be problems with finances. Maybe it's problems with all of them at once. And you feel like you're just trapped and surrounded by problems. That's how Judah felt, how the kingdom of Judah, the city of Jerusalem, felt. And what Satan will try to do is lie to you in that case. He'll lie to you just as these aides of Hezekiah did, to make them feel like it's foolish to trust God. You will feel like the problems are so big and so massive that there's really no point in trusting God. It's not going to work. This is what the Rabshakeh said to them in verse 4 and 5 of chapter 36. On what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust that you have rebelled against me? Now that's what it's going to seem to you like. What Satan is going to try to convince you when you try to pray about these massive problems that you're facing, Satan is going to try to convince you that they're just mere words. It's not really a prayer that works. It's not effective. There's nobody up there that's listening to your words. They're just mere words, and that is no strategy for war. So that's the first thing that Satan will try to do. Don't listen to him. Don't believe him. Now, the second thing he's going to try to do is going to try to convince you that you haven't been religious enough, you haven't worshiped God enough, you haven't prayed to God enough, you haven't been in the Word enough to get him to pay attention to your prayers. This is what he says in verse 7. If you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed? So he's saying, look, you claim to trust in God, but you're going around, Hezekiah's going around taking down all the altars to this God that you're praying to. You haven't done enough. You haven't done what you should have done, so God would be in a position to listen to your prayers. And then the last thing he's going to do is to get you preoccupied with your weakness. He says this in verse 8, come now, make a wager with my master the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able on your part to set riders on them. Well, Hezekiah didn't have 2,000 riders to set on these horses. And so that's what Satan will try to do. He will try to get you preoccupied with your own weakness rather than preoccupied with God's strength. That will be the strategy of Satan, to get you preoccupied with your own weakness rather than to become preoccupied with the strength of God. Well, God's strength, as we saw, was sufficient for them in the day of distress and trouble. Well, let's go to prayer together as a listening audience for our nation and for ourselves. Lord Almighty, we pray to you as the God of Israel, as the God who is enthroned between the cherubim in your unseen temple in the heavens. You alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You alone made heaven and earth. We ask you to give ear to our prayer, to open your eyes and see. We bring our nation before you today, just as Assyria threatened Judah. So we have an enemy who serves a different God and seeks our destruction. We pray that you will listen to their words of insult against you, the living God. They have blasphemed you, raised their voice against you, and lifted their eyes in pride against you, the Holy One of Israel. I pray this day for my family, for this listening audience, everyone within the sound of my voice, especially when we face days of distress. I pray that in that day you will strengthen our faith, Prompt us to pray to you and bring each concern before you. Please give us a word of encouragement in that day. In Jesus' name, amen.
You know, people often ask me, Tim, what's your favorite part of the Holy Land Tour? I've been leading Holy Land Tours for many years now. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. You know, I learned how to lead these Israel tours from my dad, who started doing them in the 60s. And then he taught me in the 80s and 90s. And now my wife Allison and I lead these tours annually to Israel. And we love going because we love seeing people's eyes when they see things such as the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River and the Garden Tomb and the Wailing Wall. See all these things for the first time, and maybe the last time in many folks' lives, because this is a bucket list trip. We're going to be going in March. If you want a brochure sent to your mailbox, give us a call at 800-FAMILIES, 800-FAMILIES, option 5, and we'll send you a brochure. If you want to go to the website, everything's there, twholyland.com, twholyland.com.
You hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her family were booted from the Red Hen restaurant in Virginia when the owner asked them to leave. The owner said her employees were uncomfortable because Sanders worked for President Trump, who supported banning transgender people from military service. Much like the dress designers who refused to provide dresses for Melania Trump, it seems regressives do support refusing services based on moral convictions, as long as regressivism reigns.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner, or visit the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Start off on kind of an uptick today, kind of a cute little story. I don't know. I did not know there was a correct way to eat Kit Kat bars. Did you guys know that?
No.
There's a right way and a wrong way to eat a Kit Kat bar. And apparently the right way is it's got the ridges. You break off a section at a time and eat it one section at a time.
Right.
Well, this guy, her name was Haley Bird. She shared a Kit Kat with her boyfriend, whose name was Evan Wilt. Mm-hmm. And he apparently ate it entirely the wrong way. He just opened up the package and took a big bite out of the end of the bar.
Oh, wow.
And she took a picture of that. And he said, look, I've never eaten a Kit Kat bar before in my life. So he ate it all wrong. She took a picture of it, posted it on Instagram or whatever. It went viral, and people all over the world were beating up on this guy for eating a Kit Kat bar the wrong way.
I'm kind of suspicious. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. If he bit off the end of every one of those pieces, then
he got the whole
he was
bar.
going to get the
He
whole,
got the whole bar. So anyway, that is what happened. But here is the end of the story.
Okay.
Is Kit Kat. That's a Hershey's product. Yeah. They heard about this thing, and they contacted him, and they were very serious about their relationship. So what Kit Kat did is they used a 3D printer to make a Kit Kat bar out of hard plastic, but it was really a container for an engagement ring. Oh. And they made it so it would break apart, and like you're supposed to eat a Kit Kat bar, and it would reveal the engagement ring. So he took her down somewhere. I forget where they went for the proposal. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. Their families were together. Supposed to be just kind of a family outing, look at the flowers. And he got down on a knee and gave her a Kit Kat bar. And she opened it up, and there was her engagement ring. So everybody was real happy about that. And they went back to the parents' house of one of them to have a celebration, and Kit Kat had sent a bunch of Kit Kat cakes there for the celebration.
Sure.
Thanks
for the publicity.
Yeah, that was it was a smart move on somebody's part. So Kit Kat was really happy about doing it. They got some cool words in there about how tickled they were, and of course Evan and whatever her name is, Haley, they were all excited about it. That'll be an engagement day to remember. So you guys better make it now with all that effort's gone into your...
You listen to Focal Point, you know now the proper way to eat a Kit Kat bar, and you know the proper way to say Nutella.
Yes,
Did
and
I
the
say it right?
Nutella.
Okay.
Yeah, and the proper way to propose to your girlfriend. We cover all the bases here on Focal Point.
I like a good story like that every once in a while.
That's a good story.
It kicks us off. It gets us in a good
fun
mood.
Story, isn't it?
And then we bring the bad stuff.
You know, the cool part is Kit Kat, you know, seeing that somehow because it went viral, and then contacting the guy and saying, how serious are you? Well, I'm real serious. I'm going to propose. Well, let us work with you on that. So they kind of worked up that whole idea together. So good for everybody involved in that little story. You know, and some good news over from Thailand. You know, they've rescued, I think, 8 of the boys now, 8 or 10 of the boys. So they're getting down to about where they might be able to rescue all of those boys. We've got 36 personnel from the Pacific Command involved in this rescue, including 12 search and rescue drivers and staff from the U.S. Embassy. I don't know. The last word I heard, our rescue divers were not involved in the actual rescue operation. But there's one section in that cave where it's very narrow. I mean, it's basically one person wide. And so what one of the divers did to rescue a child, he had the child go through that little channel underneath him. So he had to swim through that little section with the child underneath him to get him to a safe place. But apparently it's going swimmingly, as they might say. And hopefully, by God's grace, we continue to pray, God grant your favor to these rescuers, that they'll be able to rescue every one of those children. Monsoon season getting ready to start. If they don't get them out before too long, heavy rains come, it'll be too late. Now, I want to talk about the nomination of Donald Trump to the Supreme Court. A couple of updates from this morning. This is stuff I read just before coming on air. You know, everybody seems to agree that Trump is down to 4 finalists. Raymond Kethledge, Thomas Hardiman, Amos Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh. Those are the 4 finalists. Now, according to this story from the New York Times, Kethledge is out. This is from the New York Times. The only judge among the 4 whom the president appears to have all but ruled out is Raymond M. Kethledge. Trump apparently found him likable but comparatively dull, and a lot of conservatives, such as those from the American Family Association and the groups that we work with, have voiced concern about Judge Kethledge on issues like immigration. He's actually made a couple of pretty poor rulings when it comes to the immigration issue. A couple of times he's ruled 4 illegal immigrants and stayed deportation. They had deportation orders, and Kethledge joined in a ruling that kept them from being deported. So Kethledge apparently is out, and I would think for a good reason. So that leaves Thomas Hardiman. Part of the problem with Thomas Hardiman, and we'll talk about this here in a second, very thin paper trail. The 2 leading candidates all the way along have been Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett. And the president has talked all along about wanting to appoint a woman. Well, the only woman apparently that's in the race under consideration is Amy Coney Barrett. But I want to talk about the fact that I believe that this is the defining moment of Donald Trump's presidency. The defining moment. I mean, whatever happens to his legacy in the future is going to hinge on the decision that he announces tonight. That's how important this decision is for Donald Trump, his legacy, his presidency, and even his chances of being reelected in 2020, which I believe he wants to do. Might, by the way, have the privilege of running another campaign against Hillary. She's out there making noise like she wants to run again. As I said on Twitter, the delusion is strong with this one. So everybody on the conservative side of the ledge, everybody I know, is hoping against hope that Hillary Clinton throws her hat or her back brace into the ring, whatever the case may be. Now, I want to talk again about Trump and this decision about who takes the place of Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court. He's going to announce it tonight, as you're aware, at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. This is amazing to me, the way Trump he just plays the media. You know, they think they're ripping him. They think they're scoring points. They think they're dragging down his approval numbers. Every time they turn around, his approval numbers are going up. The economy is spiking. Unemployment is going down. Small business owners have increasing confidence. More people have confidence in the economy. More people think America is moving in the right direction. They cannot destroy this guy, but that doesn't stop them from trying. So anyway, Donald Trump just plays them like the proverbial fiddle. So he's had the entire nation sitting in suspended animation for a week. Ever since Anthony Kennedy resigned, Donald Trump has controlled the narrative entirely, and very few leaks. You know, we've got information that's bleeding out. We have no idea how authentic or accurate the leaks are because Donald Trump is keeping all of us in suspense. Nobody is going to know for certain who the selection is going to be until 9 o'clock Eastern tonight. Now, what Donald Trump does with this pick, remember this is the second of 2 picks. He hit a home run with Neil Gorsuch, and now he has an opportunity to hit another round tripper with his nomination to this second pick. But he's got to be careful. This is the point of my column. If he biffs this one, if he strikes out or fouls out on this nomination, it just wrecks his chances, or puts a hole in his chances to win in 2020. It's going to put a damper on his base, and it's going to put a taint on his legacy. So there's a lot riding on this choice tonight. I don't even know how much Donald Trump is aware how much is riding on this choice. But anyway, here's what Donald Trump has the opportunity to do with the right pick, and this will bleed over into the next segment, and then we're going to get some sound bites on what people are thinking out there on the left about this nomination. What Donald Trump has the opportunity to do with this pick is to return the Supreme Court to its constitutional limitations. Most people think that the Supreme Court has no constitutional limitations. It can rule on anything it wants to. It can go anywhere it wants to, and it's completely untethered from the Constitution. Not true. There are limits in the Constitution to what the Supreme Court can and cannot do. Its job is to apply the Constitution. When you hear somebody say the job of the Supreme Court is to interpret the Constitution, run for cover, because that's a cover for mangling, rewriting, distorting the plain meaning of the Constitution. What you want is a justice of the Supreme Court says, my job is to apply the Constitution and to apply the law as it is given to us by Congress. It is not to interpret anything. We're not here to rewrite, to interpret, to decide whether a law is constitutional or not. That's not our job. It's not our role. Even though Thomas Marshall said in 1803 that's the role of the Supreme Court, the law is whatever we say it is. There's nowhere in the Constitution where the Supreme Court is given that kind of authority. Its job is not to identify what's constitutional, not to define what's constitutional. Its job is to take the Constitution as the founders gave it and to apply it to the issues that come before them, to the plaintiffs that are before them. There's nowhere in the Constitution where they're given the authority to act as super legislators for the entire country. So their job, and Donald Trump has a chance to steer the Supreme Court in this direction to become an institution that applies the Constitution rather than rewriting it, mangling it, reinterpreting it, distorting it, and settling cases for the plaintiffs before them. This is what courts do. What do courts do? They settle cases for the plaintiffs that are before them. And their rulings apply to nobody but the plaintiffs before them. If they've got plaintiffs standing before them and the court rules that one of the plaintiffs has to go to jail because he committed a crime, that ruling doesn't apply to any other robber in the country. Nobody else has to go to jail because that guy committed a crime, because their authority extends only to the plaintiffs in front of them. And that's, according to the Constitution, the job of the Supreme Court is to decide cases that come before them between plaintiff A and defendant B. That's their job. It's not to make law for the entire country. We've said it before, but we cannot oversay it. Repetition is the mother of learning. The Constitution, Article 1, first words, give all legislative authority to Congress. The Supreme Court, therefore, has zero authority to make laws. Be right back.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. In all of the controversy over President Trump's potential nominees to the Supreme Court, some of those who support an expansionist, liberal, living Constitution philosophy are attempting to attack some of the president's candidates for their Catholic faith, saying that this should disqualify them because of the potential opposition to the infamous Roe v. Wade pro-abortion decision. To say someone is disqualified for an office because of their religion is un-American as well as unconstitutional. Article 6 of the Constitution forbids it. In 1960, in the midst of the 1960 presidential campaign, Senator John Kennedy had to address this issue of his Catholicism and whether it should disqualify him from the presidency. Speaking to the Greater Houston Ministerial Association, Kennedy explained, I quote, "I do not speak for my church on public matters, and the church does not speak for me. Whatever issue may come before me as president, if I should be elected on birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be in the national interest, and without regard to outside religious pressure or dictates, and no power or threat or punishment could cause me to decide otherwise." And so he's saying, I'm going to be informed by my conscience, but it'll be my conscience that makes the decision. And then he says, but if the time should ever come when my office would require me to either violate my conscience or violate the national interest, then I would resign the office. And I hope any conscientious public servant would do likewise. But then he pointed out that he did not intend to disavow either his views or his church in order to win this election. Indeed, he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have to. He parsed it perfectly. His conscience was informed by his religious belief, but he took an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, and if the Constitution required him to do something which violated his conscience, then he would resign the office. That's the proper balance. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
Welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. You are listening to Ultra 4K radio, ultra high definition radio, more content per cubic inch of air than any other place on your radio dial. So we just talked about the fact that the Supreme Court has zero legislative authority. It's not possible for them constitutionally to enact the law of the land. Their opinions, even the Supreme Court calls them opinions. They don't call them rulings. They don't call them law. They say, here is our legal opinion. That's what they issue, opinions, not laws. And they don't have any legislative authority, according to Article 1, because all of the legislative authority, every last bit of power that the federal government has been given to enact laws has been given to Congress. So the regulatory agencies, they don't have any authority to make laws. That's a problem that we've gotten into with the Obama administration and with the Supreme Court. They've allowed these agencies to take laws that are given to them by Congress and basically put their own spin on them, and then the courts have accepted that as the meaning of the law. They could completely rewrite, extend it, take its jurisdiction and its application far outside the intent of the law, and the courts have let them get away with it. We got to get them back in the bounds where the only branch of our government that can actually enact legislation is Congress. Nobody else, and that includes the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court can settle cases for the plaintiffs in front of them. This is the point that Judge Roy Moore was making in Alabama. You know, he accepted the fact that the Supreme Court had the legal authority to grant those 16 people that were in court that day, to grant them same-sex marriage licenses. What Roy Moore contested, and rightly so, was that the Supreme Court had the right or the authority to say anything to Alabama about what Alabama could or could not do with regard to the definition of marriage. Roy Moore said, look, we weren't in court that day. We had no opportunity to make our case before the court. We weren't a plaintiff in that case. We weren't a defendant in that case. So we'll accept the fact that those 16 people can get a same-sex marriage license. You might think that's a perfectly terrible ruling on the part of the court, but that's not our call to make. But it is our call to make when they try to tell us that they've got authority over our definition of marriage. They do not, because we weren't in court. We weren't a part of that case. So anyway, a lot of issues could clear up if we would simply follow the Constitution and recognize that the Supreme Court cannot enact the law of the land. Roe v. Wade is not the law of the land. Same-sex marriage is not the law of the land. Roe v. Wade can be overturned, and Obergefell can and should be overturned as well. So anyway, that's what we want, a set of judges that just apply the Constitution, and they apply it to cases. They recognize that their authority judicially is limited to the plaintiffs that are in front of them. Just the same thing as every other court does. They're called the Supreme Court because they were the court that states would have to go to if they had a conflict, and the Supreme Court would handle issues that had to do with interaction with foreign powers, international government, because if you got states that have a beef with each other over a boundary dispute or something, you have to have a court that settles that dispute. Each of those states has a Supreme Court, but then you'd have two Supreme Courts representing plaintiffs in the same case. Can't do it. Conflict of interest. There's got to be a court above them that can settle that. That's the Supreme Court. Same with international rules. No state has the authority to settle international disputes. You've got to have a court, Supreme Court, that handles those issues. And there are a number of other cases that are specified in the Constitution that the Supreme Court, it spells it out in Article 3 exactly what cases the Supreme Court can take. It cannot, for instance, take a case that has to do with the dispute between a citizen of a state and the government of that state. It can't take that case. That's a case for the court system of that individual state. You know, a lot of these gay marriage cases were some individual or a couple going to court against its own state government. And the Supreme Court is not allowed to take those cases. They've been given no jurisdiction in the Constitution over cases that have to do with a dispute between a citizen of a state and its government. That's a job for the state Supreme Court of that state to decide. Supreme Court's got nothing to do with those cases. Anyway, let me move on here before I completely use up my time in this segment. Now, if you look at all of the screeching we're getting from the left, I call them regressives because they want to drag us backwards. If you listen to the screeching, what you have to conclude is that upholding Roe, the flawed Roe v. Wade opinion, is their holy grail. That to them is the thing. They've got to be satisfied that any candidate for the Supreme Court is going to uphold Roe v. Wade. That is their holy grail. And they don't care about virtually anything else except that and squashing religious liberty when and wherever they can. Now, I believe the left is correct that abortion is, in fact, the preeminent issue that our culture is facing today. And part of that has to do with constitutional jurisprudence. I believe that a judge who is right about Roe is going to be right about everything else. But if he, and that's the generic use of the third-person pronoun, if he is wrong about Roe, he will wind up being wrong about a lot of other things because he will fancy himself a legislator rather than a jurist at that point. Now remember, let's walk through this just for a quick minute. Remember, in the Declaration of Independence, the founders designated or defined certain rights that they called inalienable rights. That means they're rights that cannot be taken from you or from me by any authority, any human authority, whether it's a government or an individual or a company. They cannot deprive you of these rights. They're inalienable, can't be separated or alienated from you because they are a gift to you and to me from whom? From the Creator. Not a gift from government, but a gift from the Creator. And the founders defined the role of government in the Declaration of Independence, that their job is to secure these rights, to secure, to protect, to guarantee to American citizens that these rights will be protected, to guarantee the exercise of these rights. That's the job of government, not to give us our rights, but to secure them, to protect them. Only God can grant fundamental human and civil rights. So that's the job of government. That's the job of God, to give us our rights, and our job is to recognize those rights. We get that by looking at Scripture and the natural law, the moral law. And then the job of government is to protect the rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, by which they meant property. What's the first of those rights that has been given to us by God, and government has a sacred and solemn responsibility to guarantee or to secure? It is the right to life. So that's a fundamental principle of American government, that life is a gift from God, the right to life is a gift from God, and that the first role of government, the first and sacred solemn responsibility of government, is to protect the right to life. And, you think about it just logically, no one is in a position to enjoy any of the other God-given rights unless he, first of all, has been born. So that's why the right to life is so fundamental. You can't exercise any other right unless you have life, unless you have been born. Now, Antonin Scalia rightly pointed out that there is no right to abortion spelled out anywhere in the Constitution. You can scour the document from the first word to the last word, and you will find not even a mention of abortion anywhere. You will, however, find a number of references to life with the unambiguous declaration in both the Fifth Amendment and in the 14th Amendment that no one's life can be taken from him without due process. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the right to life. You have a right to life, and that right nobody can take away from you without due process. In other words, they can deprive you, government can deprive you of your right to life if you forfeited it through criminal behavior. But not the criminal behavior alone is not enough. You have to have an opportunity to face your accuser in open court, to be tried by a jury of your peers, to have the assistance of counsel, and then if you are found guilty of a death penalty crime, you forfeit your right to life. But you have to have due process before that happens. You know what? No baby in the womb ever gets due process. So their right to life is constitutionally violated by the mere fact that they are subject of an abortion. Now, since there's no power that has been granted to the central government by the Constitution to regulate abortion, then according to the 10th Amendment, that is an issue, regulating abortion, that is reserved to the states. So both Roe and the 1992 Casey case should be overturned, and the issue should be returned to the states where it belonged until 1973. People have been doing abortions for over 100 years before 1973. The issue still belonged to the states because that's the way people understood rightly the Constitution. So the first question we got to be satisfied about is a potential nominee's view of the life issue. Now, there's no doubt that Amy Coney Barrett is the most unambiguously pro-life candidate on the entire list of 25. She is unquestionably an originalist, which means that her jurisprudence on the life issue will be guided by the actual text of the Constitution, what I just went through with you, rather than some airy-fairy penumbras and words about defining the mystery of life. No, the actual text of the Constitution. Now, she has been abundantly and correctly clear that precedent is not sacred and sacrosanct. You're going to hear Democrats talk about precedent till it makes you want to throw up, because this is all they've got right now is creating some imaginary sacred and sacrosanct status for precedent. It doesn't have that kind of status. If a precedent, ladies and gentlemen, is contrary to the Constitution as written, it needs to be chucked. It needs to be scrapped. It needs to be tossed on the ash heap of history. This is what Amy Coney Barrett said. I tend to agree with those who say that a justice's duty is to the Constitution and that it is thus more legitimate for her to enforce her best understanding of the Constitution rather than a precedent she thinks is clearly in conflict with it, because there is a great deal of precedent for overruling precedent. A justice who votes to do so engages in a practice that is legitimate, not lawless. Be right back.
Exposing Washington reveals the deception that plagues our nation's capital.
The mainstream media refuses to tell the truth of what's really happening.
Exposing Washington brings clarity to the news coming out of Washington, D.C.
The American people must stay informed on what our government is doing.
Exposing Washington with Walker Wildman brings you the inside scoop of what's happening at our nation's capital.
We must take our country back.
Each Saturday at 2:30 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
The problem in our day is very similar to the problem in Elijah's day, if I might make that statement. It's not so much that we have rejected God, but that so many of us have made him such a small part of our lives. He's our Sunday God.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series, Someone Like You, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
Len Ingram of Redeem Clean felt God call him to support the American Family Association.
I'm a laundryman. I'm the son of a laundryman too. I love clean clothes. I love the business. I love everything about it. This project was built exclusively to support AFA and AFR. There's no strings attached. Another thing that I would like to see come out of this is that I would like to see other business people feel a calling to support ministries wherever and whatever they do to share the gospel of Jesus Christ.
In addition to your regular AFA giving, Redeem Clean Laundry Detergent allows you to increase your support of AFA just by continuing to wash your family's clothes. For clean laundry and support of a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Learn more, find options, and get Redeem Clean products at afastore.net. That's afastore.net.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. I want to try to get through the rest of my comments about Trump and his nominees, who clearly have an idea where I'm coming from and where I hope and pray Donald Trump will come down. And then we'll play some sound bites to give you a feel for how the left is processing this whole issue. So again, since there's no right to abortion in the Constitution, so there is no, that's spelled out, so there is no constitutional right to an abortion. Roe ought to be overturned, Casey ought to be overturned, the issue ought to go back to the states. So that's what we're looking to a Supreme Court justice to do. So we need to be satisfied, first of all, about any of these candidates about their position on life. And I'm suggesting that Amy Coney Barrett is the most unambiguously pro-life candidate that we have. On that whole list of 25, she clearly has the strongest pro-life credentials. And she is an originalist, which means she will be guided by the actual text of the Constitution and not by all that airy-fairy stuff that Anthony Kennedy came up with about whoever did the Roe v. Wade, they were talking about penumbras and emanations from the Constitution. That's just gibberish from a legal standpoint. And Anthony Kennedy, in his ruling in the Casey decision, was talking about the right of somebody to define the mystery of life. That's just gibberish from a legal standpoint. We need justices that don't use any of that kind of made-up legalese, but instead stick with the text of the Constitution. Makes things a lot simpler and clearer. Now, I want to finish that quote that Amy Barrett said about precedent. She said there is a great deal of precedent for overruling precedent. She said this in a law review article in 2013. Now, that is a brilliantly concise way to put it. There is a great deal of precedent for overruling precedent. And if a judge does it, overrules precedent on the basis of the Constitution, then he is engaging in a practice that the system itself has judged to be legitimate rather than lawless. Now, what does she mean by that? What she means by that is the Supreme Court has set aside, overturned, overruled its own precedents literally hundreds of times. Well north of 200 times, the Supreme Court has reversed itself. They've issued a ruling, and then sometime later, they reverse that ruling. They cancel that ruling. They go back on that ruling. So what does that tell you? Not even the Supreme Court itself believes that precedent is sacred and sacrosanct and can't be touched and nothing can be overturned. We've talked about this on that program before. They ruled in 2013 that definition of marriage is a state's issue. In 2015, they overruled themselves. They overturned their own ruling from 2 years ago in order to get to Obergefell. You know, they ruled in 1986 that you can criminalize homosexual conduct. They overturned that precedent in 2003 and said, no, you can't make a law that homosexuality is a crime. So they reversed themselves. You know, they reversed themselves on Dred Scott, took a civil war to overrule that, and we got the 13th, 14th, and the 15th Amendments out of that disastrous Dred Scott ruling. They overturned themselves on Plessy v. Ferguson. That took like 58 years to do that. They ruled in 1896 that as long as the black races have equal facilities, they can be separate. So they legalized separation, segregation, based on race, based on skin color. You know, and a Democratic president, Woodrow Wilson, did that. He segregated the military by race. He even segregated his own staff in the White House, built a cage for a black worker. So he'd be segregated off from the rest of the workers. That's the kind of racism that's always been a part of the Democratic Party. But the Supreme Court in 1954 said, no, we goofed on Plessy. Separate but equal is just legitimizing segregation on the basis of race. That's racism. Can't put up with it. So Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, they reversed their own precedent. So that's the point here, ladies and gentlemen. Precedent is not something that is sacred. And Amy Coney Barrett, to my knowledge, has been the clearest about that of any one of the candidates for the Supreme Court. Now, there are questions about Brett Kavanaugh. He gave a disconcerting opinion about an illegal alien teenager wanting an abortion. Some of the wording he used in that was kind of confusing and concerning. He also, in another opinion, provided the legal reasoning that Justice John Roberts used to uphold Obamacare. So in my view, Brett Kavanaugh ought to be left on the appeals court, where Amy Barrett and Neil Gorsuch should be in a position to correct any mistakes that he might make. Now, Raymond Kethledge and Thomas Hardiman have a very limited paper trail, and that's a problem. It's for this reason, I believe, that the swamp, including Swamp King Mitch McConnell, wants one of them to be the nominee. Why do they want them to be the nominee? Because they believe they will be, quote, easier to confirm, because they've got such a limited paper trail. They can't be drilled on what they had written and on any of their rulings and opinions. Well, that's how we got David Souter, ladies and gentlemen. He became a Supreme Court justice because he had virtually no paper trail. Everybody assured President Bush that he was a conservative, he'll be fine. He got on the court and he was a flaming liberal from day one. So you got a limited paper trail. To me, that is an absolute non-starter. Can't go with that, can't trust that, not enough. So Amy Barrett, in my mind, is clearly the best choice that Trump could make. She's the right choice. In fact, I think she's the only choice he has for many reasons. You can always tell who's getting the conservative job done by the ones at whom the left aims its heaviest guns. It's when a conservative is under fire from the left that you know that that conservative is getting the job done. Now, notice they've taken Scott Pruitt out by attacking him with an absolute fusillade, and now they're going after Jim Jordan, trying to do the same thing to run him out of town on a rail. And almost all of their judicial fire has been aimed at Amy Coney Barrett. The LA Times is on record singling her out as the worst judge on Trump's list. To me, that amounts to an endorsement from the LA Times. They're letting us know who they fear. So none of the regressive fire virtually has been aimed at any other potential nominee. all of which means Barrett is the one that they fear the most. Now, whoever the left fears the most, to me, that's a big plus for whoever they're going after. Now, if Trump appoints anyone other than Amy Coney Barrett, he will either anger his base or disappoint them. You know, we've already said, AFA has already said in a letter that if he appoints Brett Kavanaugh, AFA is going to oppose him. And that has been sent to Donald Trump, President Trump, from AFA and 2 other conservative organizations. He appoints Kavanaugh, we're going to oppose him. And so some of his base he will anger, arouse opposition. The other part of his base, he may just disappoint him. We'd hope for better from Donald Trump. But neither of those bodes very well for his hopes in 2020. But on the other hand, if he appoints Barrett, he will lock down his second term. I repeat, if Donald Trump appoints Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, he is a cinch, a lead pipe cinch to be reelected president in 2020. There's a quote from Shakespeare that I want to read. There is a tide in the affairs of men which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, in other words, if you pass up that chance, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures. So our president is now this day afloat on just such a sea. Let's hope and pray he knows how to read the waves and read the currents. All right, that column is up right in the middle of AFA.net. Go there. I encourage you to read it. Read it today. Whatever sharing you want to do of that, do it today, because it'll be for the archives by tomorrow morning at this time. Well, by 9:03 p.m. tonight. Now let's. I want to play just a couple of clips. Let's play clip R1, and maybe if we have time, R2. We probably won't have time. But R1, this is just a sample. This is a media montage. It's a montage of the fear-mongering that the left-wing media is doing about Trump's nominee, and they don't even know who it is. Let's listen.
Everything is at stake when you're looking at the SCOTUS pick. Everything that we've worked for decades is at stake. Abortion, abortion, workers' rights, everything. Same-sex marriage, LGBTQ rights.
What's the court going to look like for the next 30 years?
We're looking at a destruction of the Constitution of the United States, as far as I can tell.
This is a line that's been drawn about whether we are going to criminalize women.
This nomination could move the court in a really dangerous direction.
It's a very thin line between putting a woman in prison for a stillbirth or a miscarriage that she's blamed for something she did during her pregnancy, and criminalizing abortion.
So what's at stake are their constitutional rights, the protection against the abuses of power by the president, by Congress, by corporate America.
A justice that would reverse Roe. What happens? In essence, we go to 50 civil wars in each of the states plus the District of Columbia.
For instance, federal survivor benefits from Social Security, federal worker pensions could be lost.
They also want to criminalize abortion in this country. They're literally trying to punish women.
He does think a woman should be known as the Aunt Lydia of the Supreme Court.
And I think the legacy that this president is creating really is turning back the clock 100 years.
But we are in an unparalleled moment of assault on the rule of law when our fundamental liberties are in danger.
Equal rights, equal freedoms, equal liberty. It's an issue of life and death for a lot of women.
It's an issue of life and death for a lot of women. You know, I came across that clip in the car yesterday on my iPhone, and I played it for Debbie, and she's just driving the car saying, "Oh, brother. Oh, come on. Give me a break. Are you kidding me?" As she was listening to that montage. We'll be back with the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Stick with us, and we will be back. More to come on Focal Point on American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Hello, this is Dr. Ronnie Floyd, President of the National Day of Prayer Task Force. The Apostle Paul wrote that we should pray without ceasing. Every day should be a day of prayer. As you pray today, would you please remember to pray for our nation and our leaders? We know God hears our prayers, and we pray He will continue to bless and heal our land. A reminder from American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. President Donald Trump and the Republicans in the Senate are gearing up for a fight as he prepares to announce his pick for Supreme Court later tonight. Adam Shapiro has more.
President Trump says he will make his final decision on who will replace Justice Anthony Kennedy by noon Monday. The official announcement will take place at 9 p.m. Monday when the president introduces his nominee to the nation from the East Room at the White House. Advocates on both sides of the political spectrum promise to demonstrate for and against the president's nominee. Judicial Crisis Network plans to spend more than $2.4 million buying advertising on cable, broadcast TV, and digital advertising, where the pro-choice group NARAL plans to hold a demonstration at 8 p.m. Monday night against the president's nominee. That demonstration will be held on the steps of the Supreme Court. In Washington, D.C., Adam Shapiro, Fox News.
Indiana's top law enforcement officer forcefully pushes back on allegations of sexual misconduct and calls for him to step down.
In an emotional press conference at Indiana's State House, Republican Attorney General Curtis Hill called recent allegations that he groped several women false, reckless, and political.
Apparently, in this climate, the standard is guilty, and who cares if you're innocent?
He's accused of inappropriately touching women, including a Democratic state rep at a party in March. In at least one case that Hill claims is full of holes. He says he won't resign and calls for a full and fair investigation.
A week ago today, I had a name, and I want my name back.
Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
A national defense analyst says he remains skeptical about the chances Kim Jong-un will follow through on his pledge to denuclearize his country. Chad Groening has more.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made another trip to Pyongyang last week to meet with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un to begin to negotiate the terms for what is hoped to be the denuclearization of North Korea. But U.S. intelligence reported signs that Pyongyang doesn't intend to fully give up its arsenal. Frank Gaffney runs the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C.
I'm among those who very much hope that the president will succeed in this venture, but also am very skeptical that he will. And if he fails, one thing we know from history is the longer we defer dealing with this very dangerous situation, the more difficult it's going to be to deal with it safely and effectively.
So Gaffney hopes the decision will be made by the president in very short order.
Are we, in fact, going to continue to accede to the North Koreans running out the clock, even as the evidence grows that they are continuing to amass the means of threatening our country? And if that kind of calculation is made, then I suspect a decision is going to also be made that we're going to have to do something about this problem.
And Gaffney says he hopes that will be the basis to force Kim Jong-un's hand.
Kim Jong-un decides that he actually is going to fall into line and do what he's said in principle he's willing to do, which is denuclearize his country.
I'm Chad Groening.
Phase 2 of the rescue operation in Thailand are underway as efforts continue to get the members of the youth soccer team and their coach out of the caves they were exploring more than 2 weeks ago.
The eighth boy just showed up here at the hospital. A helicopter brought him in. He came right down this road here, and he's now entering the hospital, joining 7 of his other teammates inside that hospital getting some care. It's pretty incredible that they're moving along so fast on this. Yesterday when we started talking about this, we were just kind of crossing our fingers for maybe one boy they told us that might come out, and then hours ahead of schedule, one after one started coming out at increments of about an hour or so split apart. So this operation seems to be firing on all cylinders right now, and it's unclear if the operation is over for the day yet. We're trying to confirm that. But so far, 8 boys out of the cave. 4 of those boys remain in the cave with their coach.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Women and men alike find themselves in despair after an abortion. Every woman who had an abortion was for a short time a mother, every man a father. But afterwards, they're all people in pain, anger, sadness, relationship problems. These often accompany an abortion. But there is hope. Call 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who has already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
People disparage President Obama for being almost too erudite and too articulate.
If we fall for... There's always a sense that to be too articulate is to be distant. You know, a bunch of okey doke is to be the egghead. You know, it sounds funny or taken seriously by people with IQs over 80. But let me just speak.
Too erudite and too articulate.
If you've got health insurance, you can keep it. If you like your health care plan, you will keep your plan. If you've got a business, you didn't build that. I don't know all the facts. The Cambridge police acted stupidly.
Too articulate.
If we fall for...
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy and welcome to the second hour of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point and the network, American Family Radio Network. Welcome aboard the USS Focal Point. It is, in fact, a warship, and we will be expecting you at your battle stations in the next couple of days, probably tomorrow, when Donald Trump's nominee is revealed. We are going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you, to contact your senators one way or another. Vote for this guy or don't vote for this guy. So everybody's going to have to be prepared to show up tomorrow and man your battle stations, because we are going to go to culture war tomorrow. So be prepared for that. By the way, nothing to fear at the EPA. I sent out a tweet saying I was hoping and praying that Donald Trump would appoint somebody who's just as much of a hatchet man as Scott Pruitt was when it came to cutting EPA regulations. And we got some good word from Climate Depot. It's a website I'm on frequently and doing show prep, Mark Morano's website. And he said that most of the people that are staffing the highest positions in the EPA are former aides to Senator James Inhofe, Senator Jim Inhofe. He was one of the great senators, but he was a skeptic about man-caused global warming, just like you and me. He thought the whole thing was a sham, it was a scam, and it was a hoax. And so he had staff, he had aides around him that shared that same point of view. And now these aides have gone virtually lock, stock, and barrel over to the EPA. So they will be managing that agency. So I think that agency, I want to mention this to you because I think the agency is in good hands now. With Scott Pruitt leaving, everybody wondered who's going to take his place. And what one guy said, let's see if I can find the quote here. It's a pretty good quote. This is an energy lobbyist and a former congressional staffer said this: with these Inhofe staff, you get all of the Pruitt policy and none of the Pruitt baggage. Now, I frankly think a lot of Pruitt's baggage was hyped. It was exaggerated. There was a lot of hyperbole. There was a lot of rumor that was translated into fact by the media because they were out to get him and hang his scalp on the wall. But there's no baggage, not the same baggage apparently, with Senator Inhofe's staff. So looks like things are in good hands at the EPA, and that is good to know. I'm looking at a piece on the Daily Caller about this heat wave in Southern California. I talked to my sister yesterday. We try to talk with her each week in Southern California. And, you know, she said, man, it has just been hot. It's been like Africa hot in Southern California. But James Watts, on his website, he's a meteorologist that tracks this stuff. And he has questions about some of the temperature readings that have been reported in this heat wave. And the reason, he says, is the placement of a lot of the thermometers, or whatever they use, whatever they call the fancy pants thermometers. But what they do with these thermometers is they are put in places where they're going to absorb human-produced heat. So there are artificial heat sources, artificial heat sinks that are located around some of these weather stations. Cities are warmer than surrounding countryside. In fact, I remember distinctly back in the day, I went to a Bible study across town when I was still living in Boise, and I rode my motorbike, my scooter, to the Bible study, which is across town. And by the way, a guy that rode a Harley, I've told Rob this story, was a guy who was riding a Harley, came to the Bible study. We'd pull up at the same time, and I'd park my tiny little motorbike next to his big giant hog, and I would refer to my ride as a piglet. You ride a hog, I ride a piglet. Anyway, we're leaving one night, and I pulled up to Tim. I said, Tim, and I'm idling my little motorbike. I said, Tim, I know I have got something on my scooter that you do not have on your Harley. Looks at me and says, what's that? So I hit my little horn. Beep, 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 beep. I don't know, do they use that on a Harley?
Oh, yeah, you got horns.
You got, is it
not
a beep beep?
It's not a beep beep.
Is it a beep beep?
It sounds like a car horn. Yeah.
Oh, it does? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, mine was a little beep beep, like the Roadrunner before he takes off. So anyway, I got myself distracted by that story that I find kind of cute.
I thought you might have one of those little bells like we used to have.
Like on a bike? Yeah, we squeeze the little bulb. Yeah. Anyway, back to my topic here.
He had to put cards in the spokes to make it sound louder.
That's right. Yeah. But it was a mean piglet, let me tell you. Now, what Watts said, if you look at some of these weather stations, like in Honolulu and Tucson, you could take a look at all the service vehicles that were parked around these thermometers. And there's asphalt there. What does asphalt do? It heats up in the day and it gives off that heat. You ever stood on a dark surface on a sunny day and how much heat it absorbs? And then it reflects that into the surrounding environment. So you get some of that with the places that these weather stations are put. In fact, the United Kingdom rejected a record high temperature at a place called Motherwell, Scotland in June of this year because an ice cream truck had been idling right near the weather station with its engine on, which could possibly, obviously, contaminate with the heat exhaust coming out, could contaminate the reading. Let's see, read a little bit further down. There's another weather station, James Watt says, that is snuggled between an industrial park, a runway, a road, and a taxiway. This is the Van Nuys Airport weather station, which recorded 117 degrees Fahrenheit on Friday. At the Burbank Airport, and airports are usually where these weather stations are put, but at Burbank Airport, the weather station is virtually surrounded by asphalt runways, taxiways, and aircraft parking ramps. The likelihood for the station to get in the middle of jet wash, and the jet wash off one of these jets is 400 degrees. 400 degrees of heat in the jet wash, and that jet wash will be aimed right at some of these weather stations. So it's, because they're close to taxiways, the airport, the planes are turning, and all that. So again, UCLA, their weather station recorded 111 degrees on Friday, but the university's thermometer is on the roof of the building where it's likely to be hit with artificial heat, like whatever roofing materials they use and shingles and they use and all that. I don't even know. Maybe they paint the, maybe the roof is painted white. Well, what does white do?
Reflect.
I mean, it reflects light, reflects heat. So anyway, That's why you got to take some of these recordings with the proverbial grain of salt. Got a story here in the Wall Street Journal about men wearing watches that don't tell time. And so apparently it's just now bling for men. Just a kind of an accessory.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll be right back with more. Stay with us, Focal Point American Family Radio.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
In 3 days, this Wednesday, July 11th, my book will be available to buy. I'd like you to buy it and read it. I wrote the book to be read. If you don't read it, you'll never understand what's really happening in the exam room and at the hospital. And you won't be able to protect yourself from the dangers, distractions, and big brother and big data agendas for you and your doctor. You won't learn what the real purpose of the government-mandated, government-certified electronic health record is. Read it to protect you and your family. I include specific action steps you can take to stop Big Brother. Find the book by going to bigbrotherintheexamroom.com.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
Netflix continues to ignore the outcry about 13 Reasons Why. The American Family Association, along with Parents Television Council and several other pro-family groups, have reached out to the streaming service urging the cancellation of their program. Netflix has not even responded to our letter. Instead, they released an even more vile Season 2 and are producing Season 3. Netflix CEO Reed Hastings says their program is engaging and that it fosters discussion of taboo topics like suicide and sexual assault. But at what cost? 14-year-old Anna Bright and several other teens have committed suicide after watching the show. Hastings calls our objections propaganda. Does he feel the profitability of his company is worth more than the lives damaged or lost because of his show? Please sign our petition to Netflix, learn more, and share our action alert when you visit afa.net. And pray Reed Hastings will recognize the dangers of 13 Reasons Why.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Program is Focal Point Network, American Family Radio. Don't forget, my newest column is up at afa.net. Today's the day to read it. Want to read it in anticipation of the president's announcement tonight about who his Supreme Court nominee will be. Again, here is an indication of how the left has no sense of humor. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, the left or regressives, they have no rationality. They don't reason. They don't use logic. They don't use rationality. And they have no common sense. And they have no sense of humor. I mean, the three of the things that make us human beings, rationality and common sense and a sense of humor, completely absent, lacking on the left. Here's an example of that. This is from a town in California, Dixon, California, and the vice mayor, this is the assistant mayor, not even the mayor, he declared in a post on his own blog that July should be, quote, straight pride month. And he's writing this thing tongue-in-cheek. It's a That's Life column in the local newspaper. And here's what he said at the end of June, quote, last Sunday ended LGBTQFWTF month with tens of thousands of folks dancing and prancing all over America, celebrating the fact that they are different than most of the rest of us and showing their pride in being so. So with his tongue in his cheek, said the Washington Times, he wrote, last week I proclaimed the month of July as SPAM, Straight Pride American Month. Now, as vice mayor, I don't know if I can, but what the heck? So he says, now hundreds of millions of the rest of us can celebrate our month, picking on July 4 as healthy, heterosexual, fairly monogamous, keep our kinky stuff to ourselves Americans. Don't get me wrong, he said. I support the First Amendment. as much as the next person, support the rights of grown men to wear skin-tight short shorts and go-go boots and don Tinkerbell wings with wands and prance down the streets of San Francisco. Anyway, they've already got a petition to demand his recall.
Oh, wow.
It's got 23,000 signers by yesterday afternoon. The town of Dixon only has 19,000 people in it. So I don't know. And the organizers of this Facebook protest page, they're planning a protest at the Dixon City Council meeting tomorrow. So that should be kind of interesting to watch. But he's up for re-election in November, so the voters will have an opportunity to decide what they think about him. Now let's get back to some sound bites here on the Trump Supreme Court nominee. Here is a second clip. This is a media montage, a second clip of all of the hysterical bloviation on the part of the left. Now, while you're listening to this, just picture Debbie, my wife, sitting in her car saying, "Oh, come on. Give me a break." That kind of stuff as you hear these clips. Right, let's listen.
We might lose some of the most precious ideals of our country.
So basically, if you are not a straight white male in America right now, you are probably freaking out.
If I were involved in a same-sex marriage in one of those states, I'd be panicked.
And say to them, your health care rights, protection against pre-existing condition abuses is at stake. Clean air and water you use and breathe is at stake. The future of your rights to reproduction decisions is at stake.
Women who are in states that do not have protection, but who need abortions, who literally need abortions, are going to suffer from it. Unions, people who are in unions, are going to suffer.
This is not a fire drill.
This may be the pull the fire alarm moment that you have been expecting.
This is definitely the break the glass moment, yes.
What it means as a woman of color to be denied equity and justice in the system of justice in the United States. Right. My fear on the basis of who President Trump might nominate.
The fundamental rule of law that is at stake.
This is an issue of extraordinary human rights on the line for generations to come.
We're not screwed. We're actually screwed for generations. I think that the gravity of this is something that we have to take heed of.
What if birth control was illegal? What would you do if birth control was illegal? It used to be illegal in some places.
Our old friend Rachel Maddow there. So that's just the hysteria and the bloviation on the part of the left. And all they have is fear-mongering, you'll notice at this point. They have no arguments. They have no facts to bring. They have no history to bring. It's just bloviation and hysteria. Now let's listen to Donald Trump. This is his weekly address from this weekend, where he talked about the importance of this nomination and what he is taking into consideration as he makes the appointment.
Last year, I was proud to appoint Justice Kennedy's former law clerk, Neil Gorsuch, to the Supreme Court. Over the last year, Justice Gorsuch has embodied the most sacred principles of the court, making impartial decisions based upon the Constitution. In choosing Justice Kennedy's replacement, my greatest responsibility is to select a justice who will faithfully interpret the Constitution as written. Judges are not supposed to rewrite the law, reinvent the Constitution, or substitute their own opinions for the will of the people expressed through their laws. We reject judicial activism and policymaking from the bench. The faithful application of the Constitution is the bedrock of our freedom, the foundation of our society, and the linchpin of our government. The American system tasks Congress with writing the laws, the executive with enforcing the laws, and the judiciary with issuing neutral judgments based upon those laws and the Constitution we have sworn to protect. In choosing a new justice, I will select someone with impeccable credentials, great intellect, unbiased judgment, and deep reverence for the laws and Constitution of the United States.
So that's Donald Trump, what he's looking for in a Supreme Court nominee. Same thing that you and I are looking for. A justice who will faithfully interpret, I would use the word apply, the Constitution as written. They're not supposed to rewrite the law. They're not supposed to reinvent the Constitution. They're not supposed to substitute their own opinions for the will of the people. as expressed through Congress, remember, which is where all the legislative authority resides. So what do you do if Congress passes a law that you believe is unconstitutional? You complain to your representatives because they're the ones that can fix it. They can look at the Constitution themselves. They can decide whether it fits, whether the law that they just wrote fits with the Constitution. If they don't think it does, they can rewrite it. So that still leaves the people in charge of their own Constitution. So Donald Trump is rejecting judicial activism, policy making from the bench. Now, I will guarantee you Donald Trump did not write these words himself, but they were written by somebody who was really smart. Faithful application of the Constitution is the bedrock of our freedom, the foundation of our society, and the linchpin of our government. And then he breaks down the different branches of government. Congress, that's the legislative branch, they write the laws. The executive branch, that's the presidency and the people that work for him, are entrusted with enforcing the laws. And the judiciary with settling cases, applying the laws that Congress passed. So that's what Donald Trump is going to choose. By the way, I was reminded in reading through Isaiah over the weekend that the three branches of justice are actually anticipated in Isaiah 33, verse 22. This is not original with me, but it's worth reminding you about this in case, or pointing it out to you if you hadn't heard it before. But the whole concept of having three branches of justice of the legislature, of the government, is found in Isaiah 33:22. Isaiah says, the Lord, Yahweh, is our judge. What branch of the government is that? That is the judicial branch. The Lord is our lawgiver. What branch is that? That is the legislative branch. And the Lord is our king. That's the executive branch. Now, Yahweh is the only being in all of history who could combine all that authority in one person. Because you put that much authority in the hands of any one man, he's going to mess it up for sure. That's why the founders, who were well aware of the sinfulness of man, divided the authority into three branches, each to serve as something of a check on the other. All right, so that's Donald Trump's weekly address about the kind of judge he's going to appoint tonight, and we hope and pray that he does. Now, let's drop down to clip number 1. This is Roy Blunt, who is the senator from Missouri. By the way, Claire McCaskill is the other senator from Missouri. She's somebody to watch because she's got a contest. She's running for re-election. Could have been Todd Akin in this position. Todd Akin could be the one facing re-election this fall if the Republican Party in 2012 had come to his aid when he made that statement about rape. He just got hammered, got drilled by everybody. The Republican Party and the leadership withdrew from him like he was a scalding stove, left him out there to hang. Reince Priebus, we're not going to give one penny to that guy. Well, we could have a reliable vote for a conservative jurist if the Republican Party had come to their senses and fought for Todd Akin. Anyway, here is Roy Blunt talking here with Chuck Todd.
Your colleague Lindsey Graham here last week said he believes Roe is essentially settled law. He believes in precedent and wants to see a nominee that also believes in precedent. Where are you on this?
Well, I think these judges, whichever one's nominated, should follow the Ginsburg strategy, which is no hints, no foretelling of how they're going to determine.
It's the 21st century.
Happens.
21st century. I think the American people should know. No?
You don't think the notorious RBG standard is good enough?
This is the 21st century where we expect everything.
No, I think we expect judges to judge the case that comes up before them. I'm not a lawyer. This is maybe a pretty good month not to be a lawyer, but precedent's important, but precedent's not the only thing. We have had bad precedents that were reversed after decades.
That's not a non-starter for you.
What is not a non-starter?
The idea, stare decisis, that if somebody doesn't believe in that,
I think
you're not.
I think judges need to look at the case. The court needs to look at the case and determine that case on the facts of the case.
That's Roy Blunt. That's a pretty good response. You know, and the notorious RBG standard, that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was confirmed 96-3 So you talk about Republicans jumping ship and wading across the swamp to sit in the boat on the other side. That was Republicans with RBG. And she didn't answer any question. She didn't tell the Senate which way she would vote or lean on anything. No hint, no notification. So Roy Blunt wisely calls it the RBG standard, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg standard. And Chuck Todd says, well, this is the 21st century. Well, it was the 20th century. Why didn't you ask Ginsburg back in 1996? We'll be right back.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for a health care plan, or more importantly, if you signed up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called Medi-Share. Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have hundreds of thousands of members all across the country. And get this, over the years, Medi-Share members have shared more than $2.5 billion of each other's medical bills. Best of all, you could save a lot of money with Medi-Share. The typical savings for a family is about $500 a month. Your savings may be less or more, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join Medi-Share anytime, so call them today and check it out. Here's the number to find out more. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. Just hit *345. That's *345, *345.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've seen God open up so many doors for us to help serve and love those who get affected by a natural disaster.
As the trees and the wind started crashing down around us, my wife was, of course, very diligently praying, Lord, please be with us.
Very simply, we do it because God commands us to love others.
I see these volunteers all as a gift from God.
And I'm just grateful they're here, helping out is a blessing.
If you're interested in becoming a part of what God's doing through 8 Days of Hope, please go to 8daysofhope.com, click on Get Involved, submit your email address.
I've noticed that whenever there's a time in my life when things might be a little gloomy, the number one thing that I can do is to go serve somebody.
And I would encourage anyone else to, it's worth it. Come out and do it next time if you didn't make it to this one, and the Father will really bless you in it.
Thank you so much for your prayers and volunteering with 8 Days of Hope.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher. Brian J. Fisher.
Howdy. And welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Let's take your calls. Brian Fisher is my name. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that after the way I opened this segment. But
you do have fun.
Yeah.
You do.
But I am Brian Fisher. The program is Focal Point, and the network is American Family Radio. We'll take your calls over this last half hour of the program, so let's load them up. Hannah is sitting ready for your phone calls. The number is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. Like to get your opinions, your comments, your questions on this nomination process. Any ideas you have of what you think Trump is going to do, who you like, what Trump ought to be concerned about, how you'll respond if Trump makes a bad choice, all that, any of that stuff, we'd like to hear from you. 888-589-8840. So anyway, I've made my preferences clear, and we've made those preferences clear to President Trump. We had 47,000 people sign our petition to President Trump to appoint Amy Coney Barrett. So we've weighed in on this, and if you signed that petition, you weighed in along with us. It was interesting. Campus Reform went to a college campus, and they asked college students, this is before, of course, Donald Trump had even nominated anybody, and they asked them, what do you think of Donald Trump's Supreme Court nominee? Now that he's nominated somebody, what do you think of him? And they had no idea who it was because he hadn't been nominated, but it didn't stop them from teeing off. Well, I think he's quite extreme in his views, said one of the students of this fictitious judge. I saw it all over the news that he's like a racist, is what another one said. I saw the new nominee as like a racist, and he's starting a new wave of something very negative. and I'm really scared about the future and what choices he will make. That's what another student said. One faculty member said she has been witnessing outrage, as it should be, over Donald Trump's nominee.
She's been witnessing the outrage.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody that hasn't even been nominated.
Yeah. So. All right. Wow. Well, this is a Meet the Press excerpt. I got several sound bites from Meet the Press on Sunday. This is a panel discussion. We're going to listen, first of all, to Mark Murray, who is the NBC News senior political senior political editor, talking about the lack of a paper trail for Hardiman and Kethledge. Clip 1.
And, you know, the argument for also Thomas Hardiman is that he doesn't have that kind of paper trail. And to me, the biggest question about the Supreme Court pick is who ends up having the most pressure on them? Is it someone like Senator Susan Collins and Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski? Or is it the Joe Manchin, the Democratic of West Virginia, Joe Donnelly of Indiana, and the Hardiman-Kethledge with not a big paper trail, they're more bland jurists. The pressure would probably be on the Manchins and the Donnellys. But all of a sudden, if you are talking about Amy Barrett, who has said some explicit things about abortion and on the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, the pressure certainly then goes to Collins and Murkowski.
That's where the pressure is going to be on Collins and Murkowski, I believe, especially if Barrett is the pick. But remember, the absence of a paper trail, that's how we got Souter and Kennedy. Everybody knows where Barrett stands on these very important issues. Again, that number to call is 888-589-8840. Love to get your opinions on Donald Trump and what he's doing, who you think he's going to pick, how you think the left will react. Let's go to Joe in Delaware, Ohio. Joe, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Oh, thanks for all that you do. I'm like most Christian conservatives, support Amy Barrett. I think she'd be a great choice. I think whether it's her or any of the other candidates are going to come under an intense attack from the liberals. I think we've got to defend them and match their intensity. I mean, that's the only thing the left has right now is, you know, they're a racist, they're a bigot, they were involved in sexual misconduct 35 years ago. That's the only thing the left has right now. So I think that the Christian conservatives have got to support and stand with Trump in the nominee. Like you said, Barrett is. I hope and pray that she is the one. But any of the 25 on the list will be better than anybody Hillary would have appointed. So I think we got to keep everything in perspective.
Yeah. And Joe, it's interesting that you're right. You're exactly right. The left, all they have is hysteria and false accusation. And they will lob that at whoever the pick is. Joe is exactly right about that. They will lob those accusations, that hysteria, that fear-mongering at any nominee that Donald Trump picks. So my point is, hey, as long as any nominee is going to get that, why don't we get the best nominee up there that we possibly can? Let's go for Amy Coney Barrett, because it doesn't matter who he trots out. They're just going to get absolutely savaged by the media on the left.
It does seem like the Democrats have kind of shot themselves in the foot on this one because they're going to reject anybody and everything this nominee is going to be or stand for. So there any chance of Trump trying to work together on this nomination is gone. So he might as well pick whoever he wants.
Yeah. And see, the guys like Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Donnelly, rather, from Indiana. And we could have had Richard Murdoch as the senator from Indiana right now. A sure vote for conservative. But again, he misfired. I forget what the deal was. Misfired somehow on some social issue. And the Republican Party, again, just abandoned him in droves. We could have Roy Moore as a senator in Alabama if the Republican leadership had come to his aid when he was facing all of those false accusations. But they didn't. They ditched him. They abandoned him. And now we've got Doug Jones. We don't know where he's going to come down. Doug Jones says, hey, I'm going to make an independent decision, might vote for Trump's nominee, might not. But we'd have no question if Roy Moore was a senator from Alabama. All right, let's go to Tom, Grand Haven, Michigan. Tom, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian.
Hey.
I approve of the young lady being appointed to the judgeship, but when you opened up your program today and you talked about King Hezekiah, I have a little something that I would like to fill in with there, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What happened was, at that time, the circle of the Earth around the sun was 320 days, and when the 10 degrees went back, that changed it to 365.242, which, of course, was a Gregorian calendar set up in 536 A.D. by the Pope. Anyways, in the Revelation, the tribulation period is 7 years of 2,520 days, which means 360-day years. In other words, somehow God is going to bring us back to the earth circling the sun 360 days during that 7-year tribulation period. Nobody has ever thought of that or talked about it. And I was brought to look back in Genesis, where Noah was on the boat ark for 150 days and 5 months. That gave us the 320-day cycle around the earth. But no.
All right, Tom, well, listen, I appreciate your call. That's something I had not thought about before, and so we'll refer that to our listening audience to do some study on their own about that issue. And it is true that the Hebrew calendar was based on a lunar calendar, a monthly cycle, and so the years do not match up to a solar cycle. So they had to insert what was called an intercalary month every so often to reconcile the lunar month with the solar month. All right, Tom, thank you for the call. Let's grab a call from Charles in West Jefferson, Ohio. Charles, welcome. What's on your mind?
Brian, the president ought to appoint the judge he wants, not even send it to the Senate, because the only reason they got these rules is to take the people's vote out of it. And all the other rules they make, too, it just takes the people's vote out of it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you're right, Charles. I appreciate the call, and that's why it's so important that we recognize that the Supreme Court does not have any lawmaking ability. They have the authority to settle a case for the plaintiffs and the defendants that are in front of them, but they have no authority to make law for all of America. That was a conceit that was advanced by the Chief Justice at the time, John Marshall, did it real early, 1803, and everybody accepted it. Thomas Jefferson squawked, but other people seemed to buy into it, and so we've been kind of stuck with it ever since. But the Supreme Court has no authority to make law for all of America. Let's go to clip number 3. This is Eugene Robinson from the Washington Post.
Look, I don't know if the Supreme Court is ever going to be a voting issue for the left as it is for the right, unless and until Roe v. Wade is overturned, and then it might be. And Roe is really what sparked, I think, the conservative, not obsession because it's real, but the conservative focus on the Supreme Court and the fact that that is a voting issue for so many conservatives. And then it's sort of other issues sort of hang off of that. But I think Roe v. Wade is the central trunk of that tree, and so I don't think it's going to get there unless something happens to Roe. I think they do need to fight because the base expects them to fight. I mean, even people who are now, they're going to vote, they're excited, but they want to see a fight.
They want to see a fight. They don't know what they'd fight about because Eugene Robinson can't tell them what they ought to fight about other than Roe, but you got to fight. It's never been an electoral issue before, and I'll tell you why it's never been an electoral issue before for the left, because they've had the Supreme Court in the bag since 1973. The Supreme Court has advanced every dream issue for the political left in America. So they haven't had to make it an electoral issue because they've had the court acting as the super legislature to make all the decisions that they wanted Congress to make but couldn't persuade them to make. So all that whole equation changes now with a judge that may be part of overturning Roe v. Wade. You know, and I think Eugene Robinson is right about Roe. I hadn't thought about this, but I think he's right about Roe. That is what galvanized the entire conservative resurgence in America. That's why we need Amy Barrett, somebody who's right on Roe, is going to be right on everything else, like I said. And, you know, Eugene Robinson saying they need to fight, their real objection is really to anybody, and their only objection is to anybody who might overturn Roe. And the reason that Roe has never been a voting issue for the left, or the Supreme Court has never been a voting issue for the left, is because they've always had Roe. And they will fight to the death to hang on to that. So here's hoping that Donald Trump does not go wobbly, does not back down from the very fight we need to have. You know, he campaigned as a pro-life president, so now's the time to prove it beyond any shadow of doubt. You know, and I think we think Barrett's the one. And the LA Times basically endorsing her by saying they believe she's the worst of all the candidates, which means she's the best, the equivalent of an endorsement. We'll be right back with more of your calls and more sound bites. Stick around. Focal Point American Family Radio. We'll be right back.
Washington Watch advances a culture where human life is valued and religious liberty thrives.
Hello, this is Tony Perkins, host of Washington Watch, right here on the American Family Radio Network, inviting you to join us each afternoon at 4 p.m. Central Time for the latest from our nation's capital on what is happening as it pertains to faith, family, and freedom. You'll hear from policymakers, congressional leaders, and others every day on AFR.
For well over a century, secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
Progressives had no problem with saying we can leave the Declaration of Independence behind. For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Are you a responsible person who finds yourself growing deeper and deeper in credit card debt and you're not sure how to fix the problem? Then get ready for a toll-free number that will put you on a path to financial recovery. Trinity Debt Management is a nonprofit organization that will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, and reduce your interest rates by as much as 60%. You'll save thousands and become debt-free for keeps. It's not a loan. It's a smart way to relieve your stress, meet your obligations, and preserve your self-respect. If your debt has you down, we should talk. Gather up your bills and call this toll-free number for a free, no-obligation debt analysis. 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813. If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, welcome back to this last segment of today's edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Take some more of your calls, grab a couple of more sound bites as we move forward. Let's grab soundbite number 4 if we can, Rob. This is Susan Murray. She's from USA Today, and she was on this panel, this Meet the Press panel, talking about Donald Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court.
You know, this is a good thing for Republicans in the short term. This is going to help them with turnout. Either way, they're going to have a big fight. Republicans and conservatives that vote on the court. You might want to watch out what you wish for over the long term. If you are credited with overturning Roe v. Wade or with accepting a lot of new state restrictions on abortion rights.
With 5 men, by the way, doing it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not Amy Barrett, right?
You could
5
pay
men.
a big cost with women voters, with millennials who are pretty clear on where they stand on this issue. And over the long term, this could be the seeds of real problems for the GOP going down the road.
Okay, so even the left always trying to find some way to warn the Republicans, don't do this, it'll hurt you in the end. I think she's exactly wrong. If Donald Trump wants to galvanize turnout among the conservative base, he cannot afford to be wrong on this nominee. He needs to appoint somebody who is unambiguously pro-life and will be inclined to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that's Amy Coney Barrett, who is a woman, by the way. Let's watch the women of America. I mean, they will attack her. Their claws will come out. But they will attack a woman who is a mother of 7 children, including 2 that she's adopted from Haiti. And we know what's going on in Haiti these days, not a place for kids to be raised. How do you attack a woman who is a mother of 7 children, including 2 adoptees from Haiti? But they will certainly find a way to do that. And if Trump wants to galvanize turnout, the best thing he can do is appoint a strong pro-life candidate, because he'll fulfill his promise to the base that he was going to be a pro-life president. I think she's also wrong about millennials. Millennials are more pro-life than their parents' generation. Not a lot of people know this, but millennials are more pro-life than the generation that preceded them. And I think part of it is they know that they are survivors of the abortion holocaust, that they are lucky to be alive, and therefore they are more pro-life than their parents' generation. All right, let's grab a call from Blake in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Blake, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, I'm a 20-year-old Christian conservative, and I really love your show.
Thank you.
It's awesome, and I really love what you're talking about. But my main thing is I really think that prayer is going to be one of the keys to this. I really love that you always recommend to be praying for President Trump. And that reminded me of when Trump revealed the White House Faith Initiative on National Day of Prayer, he quoted, "Faith is more powerful than government, and nothing is more powerful than God." And I think that's really important. And for citizens and Christian conservatives to be praying for President Trump and for guidance for him from God, that's going to make the big difference, and God will really protect this nation. And I really hope that Roe versus Wade gets overturned. And another thing I thought was really interesting, and if you would want to look into it, there's a guy named Mark Taylor, and he wrote a book called Trump Prophecies. And I was curious on your thoughts on that, if you've heard about that. And
yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that book, but I'll keep my eye out for it. Blake, let me ask you one favor. Would you be kind enough to offer a brief prayer for President Trump right now as he's making this decision? Would you do that for us? And we'll pray with you.
Sir. God, thank you for everything you've done for us, and please protect President Trump, and please guide him as he's making a decision this evening, and just please show him what to do. And thank you for always watching over us, and please protect all of us, and please watch over this nation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Blake. I appreciate that. Let's grab a call from James in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. James, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Yes, I am all for Trump, and I think that God has put him in office at the right time, and that Amy Coney Barrett is the right decision, and it would be such poetic justice for Trump to take her as the Supreme Court justice to protect the women that won't even get to be born if Roe doesn't get overturned.
That's very, very good. You know, James, I used to tell my liberal friends on the left, I am for equal rights for unborn women. Who's protecting the rights of unborn women? And you're right, James. Amy Coney Barrett would do that. Very good. Thank you, James. Great call. I appreciate it. Let's go to Ari in Wilmington, North Carolina. Ari, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian.
Hey.
One of the things that kind of bothers me is the fact that the left, pretty much without much opposition, for the last 50 years, they've been forging link by link a chain around liberty to put it in bondage with the imperial judiciary, a tyranny of the judiciary, and then the indoctrination in the schools, so that when Republicans come to power, the left and the media, they'll say, well, we'll tolerate a slowdown. But the idea of reversing course and going in the other direction is they can't tolerate it. It is unimaginable to them. And
well, you know,
we've got to go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and I think you make a very good point there, Ari, that whenever the left makes any gain, it's a little bit like Muslims, like the Muslim philosophy of world history. Their belief is that if they have exercised control over any part, any tiny sliver of the Earth's surface, it belongs to them forever. And anybody who takes it back from them, even if they were there first, is a usurper. And that's how the left looks. Ari's exactly right. That's how the left looks at every gain they make in the culture war. They believe that that piece of turf belongs to them for the rest of history. That's the way they look at Roe v. Wade. It's ours. It belongs to us. Nobody can tamper with us. Nobody can touch this. Exactly right about how the left thinks about things, and that's why they are absolutely freaking out, because they are looking at right now under President Trump a rollback of some of their agenda gains, and they don't like it. Great call, Ari. Appreciate it. Let's go to Steve, Fayetteville, Arkansas. Steve, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Yes, sir. Sort of bleeds into the last caller. I'm surprised that we have people in the Republican Party that take comments from commentators about, we want to leave the law of the land in place, and the Democrats leave the law of the land in place. Also going back to the latest ruling against unions. But the Democrats, I think, use that same outline during the Dred Scott challenges. I think they wanted to keep the law of the land in place during that time also. So it seems like there's some things they want to keep, but now they want to forget the past of the horrific things they wanted to keep as law of the land.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, absolutely right, Steve. I appreciate that. And, you go back to Dred Scott, Abraham Lincoln did exactly what I'm talking about with Supreme Court rulings. What Abraham Lincoln said when the Supreme Court ruled that Dred Scott was the rightful property of his white slave owner, Abraham Lincoln basically said, look, I will accept the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in this case. I'll accept their ruling with regard to Dred Scott, but I will refuse to consider that ruling as a precedent for the entire United States of America. But because the Democrats hammered that thing as a president, you got to observe it, you got to protect it, it's sacred, you can't touch it, we wound up with a civil war. All right, great call. Appreciate that call, Steve. Thank you. Let me grab another soundbite from this panel on Meet the Press. Clip number 5, Rob. This is Mark Murray again, who gave us 2 clips from this panel discussion. Let's listen to what he says.
But this all comes down to winning elections. And if the Republicans have been much better in recent elections than Democrats have been, and you ask, Senator Durbin, what was the biggest mistake that Democrats made with Merrick Garland? Their biggest mistake was getting routed in the 2014 midterm elections, which allowed Mitch McConnell to take over the Senate. And actually, Democrats held on to a bare majority. You would have Supreme Court Justice Merrick Garland. And so being able to win in midterm elections and presidential elections, that's what gets you control of the court.
So that's exactly right. And again, we talked about this earlier. Imagine what this program would be like today if we were dealing with a Hillary Clinton nominee to the Supreme Court and the Democrats had a majority in the Senate. There's no way they're going to break ranks. There's no way that Hillary is going to appoint anybody but a rabid pro-homosexual activist and pro-abortion activist. And all the Democrats are going to go along with her. They would vote in lockstep. Republicans. And that's what we'd be dealing with if we had a Hillary Clinton as president. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank God every single day that she's not the one that we must deal with. Last clip of the day. Let's go to Joy Reid, clip number 6, and this is the soundbite we were having some fun with at the beginning of the program. Let's listen.
There is a thing in Republican Party politics where not being erudite as a speaker is seen as a virtue. It was with George W. Bush, the idea that he's plain spoken, and so when he would mangle the language, even the media would read that as authentic and great, right? He would make up words and people would say, great, that's great. It's his lexicon. Him charming. Right. It's Sarah Palin, the same sort of thing, where even the media was enchanted with the way she spoke. And that is actually seen as a virtue for Democrats, whereas you would see people disparage President Obama for being almost too erudite and too articulate.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a fine line. There's always a sense that to be too articulate is to be distant, is to be the egghead. That's part of why Adlai Stevenson didn't become president. Right. But then, on the other hand, we do have a very new situation where you can be aggressively, flagrantly, proudly inarticulate. Right. As in basically violating the language on purpose and looking up with a smile daily, and have that be part of why you become president of the United States. Sarah Palin was a beginning with that kind of word ambrosia of hers, and the fact that she was still taken seriously by people with IQs over 80. And then Trump ends up being the culmination of that kind of thing.
Well, they're just simply wrong. They thought Bush was an idiot. They weren't enchanted with Palin. They thought she was the devil incarnate. That's it for today. We're fighting a winnable war, ladies and gentlemen. Be back here tomorrow. See you at 1:05.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Vice President Mike Pence called the Values Voter Summit the greatest gathering of conservative, pro-family Americans in the nation. The Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. is September 21st through the 23rd. Sponsored in part by AFA Action, the summit will encourage and equip you to preserve